Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and explore the absolutely awe-inspiring life of a woman whose legacy transcends time and literally changed the course of history. We're talking about a towering figure, not just in Islamic history, but in the entire history of female leadership and resilience.
In a time when women were often powerless, she was the wealthiest merchant in Mecca. But she is not remembered for her gold. She is remembered as the first soul on earth to believe in the message of Islam. I mean, just let that staggering contrast sink in for a second. This was a woman who possessed immense material wealth and undisputed societal power, yet her eternal legacy was cemented in a moment of profound spiritual vulnerability and unshakable faith.
Chapter 1: The Merchant Princess. To really understand her impact, we've got to examine her roots first. Born into the noble Banu Asad clan, Khadijah grew up in the harsh socio-economic reality of 6th century Mecca. It was a booming trade hub connecting massive empires, but it was also a deeply patriarchal society. Think about the dramatic contrast of her era for a second. While the baseline for pre-Islamic Arabia largely marginalized women with wealth and power kept tightly under the control of male tribal leaders, Khadijah stood out as this incredibly independent, fiercely autonomous powerhouse. Sure, she inherited some wealth, but she multiplied it through sheer entrepreneurial genius to become the wealthiest and most successful merchant in all of Mecca. And to truly wrap your head around the sheer scale of her operations, get this: her trade caravans heading to Syria or Yemen often equaled the size of all the other Quraysh traders combined. Imagine holding a 50% market share in the most crucial economic artery of the ancient Middle East. It is absolutely staggering. She was known by many as Amirat Quraysh, the Princess of Quraysh. But her other profound title, and honestly the most telling one, was al-Tahira, which translates to the Pure One. In a time way before legal contracts or corporate compliance were a thing, she fundamentally understood that a person's reputation was their most valuable currency. She earned this title for her rare integrity, her highly ethical business dealings, and her just impeccable personal character. She wasn't just rich, right? She was universally respected. Chapter 2: The Meeting of Hearts. Now, this brings us to a really fascinating turning point, where her sprawling business empire leads her directly to the most important partnership of her entire life. So Khadijah didn't actually travel with her caravans. She hired agents to do the field work. Needing a manager for a crucial Syrian expedition, she used a highly strategic, character-based hiring system. She implemented the Mudaraba model, which is this timeless Islamic finance principle of sharing both the profits and the risks. But most importantly, she chose to evaluate pure integrity over years of raw experience. She hired a young man named Muhammad, who was widely known around Mecca as Al-Amin, the trustworthy. He didn't have this extensive trading background, but her gamble on his character paid off spectacularly. Working alongside her trusted servant Maysara, the young Muhammad returned with double the expected profits. But even better than the money, Maysara gave these glowing, first-hand reports of Muhammad's impeccable conduct, his kindness, and his unyielding honesty throughout the grueling journey. Deeply impressed by a soul that so perfectly matched her own values, Khadijah did something highly unconventional for the time. She boldly initiated a marriage proposal. She sent her close friend Nafisa to approach him. Once he agreed, their uncles, Abu Talib for Muhammad and Amr bin Asad for Khadijah, stepped in to finalize the union. And that marked the beginning of a beautiful 25-year partnership built on profound mutual respect, deep affection, and unshakable trust. Chapter 3: The First Believer. Their life together was incredibly peaceful and prosperous, but an event was approaching that would forever alter the trajectory of humanity. Now, you might be wondering what exactly happened in the year 610 CE. Well, the world shifted completely. Muhammad, who often retreated to the Cave of Hira for quiet contemplation, returned home one night utterly transformed. He was physically trembling, completely overwhelmed and terrified by the crushing weight of the very first divine revelation brought by the angel Jibril. He rushed into his home shivering and cried out to Khadijah, "Cover me, cover me." Just try to imagine the sheer terror of that moment, the desperate need for safety. In that dark, moonlit room, it was Khadijah who provided the calm, protective presence he needed, wrapping him in a heavy blanket until his panic finally began to subside. And this right here is the absolutely crucial point, her immediate, unshakable reassurance. Before anyone else on earth knew what was happening, she looked at her terrified husband and said with absolute certainty, "All I will never disgrace you, for you are good to your kin, you help the poor, and you are hospitable to guests." In that exact moment, relying purely on her deep, intimate knowledge of his pristine character, she became the very first person in history to embrace Islam. But Khadijah was a woman of action and intellect. She didn't just passively believe, she actively sought context. She immediately took him to her elderly cousin, Waraka ibn Nawfal, who was a Christian scholar well-versed in previous scriptures. Waraka listened carefully and validated the revelation, confirming that the same angel who visited Moses had now come to Muhammad. But he also issued a very heavy warning. This path would lead to severe persecution and exile. Chapter 4: Sacrifice and Sorrow. Unfortunately, Waraka's warning quickly became a devastating reality. As the message of Islam began to spread, the Quraysh elite pushed back, and they pushed back violently. By 616 CE, they enacted a brutal, total economic and social boycott against the Muslims. The community was literally forced into a harsh, dusty valley known as Shi'b Abi Talib. For 3 agonizing years, they faced actual starvation. And who stood as their financial shield through all of this? Khadijah, the exact same woman who once controlled the markets of Mecca, liquidated her vast empire just to smuggle food and water to the persecuted believers. The heartbreaking contrast here is just immense. She spent her absolute last cent to keep the starving community and, really, the flame of Islam itself alive. And the toll of that blockade was ultimately too much for her health. In 619 CE, shortly after the boycott was finally lifted, she passed away. The former merchant princess died with so little material wealth left to her name that a simple cloak belonging to her husband was used as her burial shroud. The Prophet's grief was so profound that this entire period became immortalized in history as al-Hazn, the year of sorrow. Chapter 5: An Eternal Legacy. But the story of Khadijah doesn't just end in the dust of that valley. Her luminous impact carried the Prophet forward and laid the foundation for a massive global faith. Just look at her lasting impact. She is forever revered as the mother of believers. She was the absolute first to accept Islam, acting as the undisputed financial backbone when the community was at its most vulnerable. She was the mother to the Prophet's children, including the deeply revered Fatimah. Khadijah wasn't just a supportive spouse, right? She was the matriarch of the faith, the foundational fortress of Islam, and a timeless model of what a perfect, multifaceted woman looks like. And the Prophet's love for her? It literally never faded. Years later, his subsequent wife, Aisha, famously noted, "I never felt so jealous about any woman as I did for Khadijah. I heard him mentioning her so often." Even though Khadijah had passed away years before, the Prophet's profound gratitude, his constant storytelling about her support, and his enduring love naturally stirred a very human jealousy. To him, she was simply irreplaceable. Her ultimate divine reward beautifully illustrates this legacy. The sources report that the angel Jibril once came to the Prophet and told him to give Khadijah glad tidings of a serene palace in paradise, made of hollowed pearls, a place where there would be absolutely no turbulence and no fatigue. It's just breathtakingly poetic justice, isn't it? A perfectly tranquil reward compensating for all the bitter exhaustion, the social noise, and the severe persecution she endured to protect the message. Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway from her life. Khadijah sacrificed absolutely all of her worldly power, her unrivaled wealth, and her societal status to support a truth she believed in with her entire soul. So my question to you is this: how are you going to use your own resources, your skills, and your reputation to uplift those around you today? Let her incredible story be the catalyst that inspires your own legacy. Thanks so much for exploring this amazing life with me in this explainer. And as always, keep learning.